Hello everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review. I hope you're having a fantastic day and welcome back to another Q&A. Obviously, this is one of my favorite kind of videos to make because I get to respond and interact directly with you guys. You ask me questions, I get to give you a call out and directly respond to whatever it is you want to hear me discuss in the moment. I usually do put these call outs on Twitter, as you guys know, but this time I decided to do it directly on YouTube through YouTube's community page. And I got a lot of great responses and great questions pretty quickly. So I do want to let you know I only grabbed, about 9 or 10 questions or so. There was a lot of great questions I did not get to, so I apologize if you asked a question and I'm not responding today, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. I tried to shake it up a little bit. I got a ton of Metroid questions as per usual, which I do love. So hopefully I got a solid mix for you guys, and so I'm not going to waste any more of your time. And we're just going to jump in to today's first question. First question on YouTube comes from LinoVR6, who says, "What up, Rob? Just wondering what your thoughts were about Metroid Prime 4's story and the timeline placement." Okay, so where will Metroid Prime 4's story actually take place? This is a bit of a big question. I've discussed it on plenty of videos in the past. And I think that there's a couple of options. I've mentioned previously how I think a lot of people maybe just default to assuming that Metroid Prime 4 will take place immediately following Metroid Prime 3, which would put it before Metroid 2, right? Because currently the Prime trilogy takes place between Metroid 1 on the NES and Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. And so if we assume Prime 4 takes place immediately following Prime 3, it would probably also fall in that window between those two old school Metroid games. And honestly, that's probably the most likely option. So yeah, more than likely, it's going to be some sort of direct follow-up. Probably a lot of time won't pass between 3 and 4, and so Prime 4 will take place before Metroid 2. But I've been one of the few people, I think, willing to kind of bounce around the idea that Nintendo may be open to introducing a huge time jump from Metroid Prime 3 to Metroid Prime 4, in which case Prime 4 could take place anytime in the timeline. In fact, I think there's even a slight chance that they actually have Metroid Prime 4 take place after Metroid Dread. And I know that initially that might sound crazy, like why would they do that? But I think when you look at some of the things that Metroid Dread introduced, such as, spoiler alert, the Metroid suit at the end of that game, I think that there's a great advantage to be had by actually setting the next Metroid game that they're making after that game so that they can start to incorporate some of those story elements. Because otherwise, we'd be taking a huge step backwards to go back in time and have Metroid Prime 4 be another prequel story. Weird to release a prequel story right after Metroid Dread comes out. Like, it's not impossible, and like I said, if I was to put money in Vegas on this, I'm going to say probably Prime 4 will take place right after Prime 3. But it's worth noting, I think there's a slight chance that they maybe move Prime 4 ahead in the timeline a little bit. Next YouTube question comes from Josiah Torres, who says, "Hey Rob, what are your options?" I think you mean opinions. "What are your opinions on Valve's Steam Deck handheld PC? Also, what would you think if Metroid Dread had a randomizer mode?" So the Steam Deck is something I haven't talked about too much on this channel. It's made it into one or two other kind of video topics that I've touched on a little bit, but I haven't actually discussed it at length. And so what I'll say about the Steam Deck is I think it seems really cool. It seems like an awesome device. At this point, a lot of people have already had Steam Decks and had several months kind of playing with the Steam Deck, and it's almost all been positive reception. So I have no reason to think that it's a poorly made device. Seems really great. Price point was very surprising. It's surprisingly competitive with, the Switch as a direct handheld competitor, as well as with PS5 and Series X. I do believe that they're losing money on every Steam Deck, but that was a bold choice. That's obviously paying off for them because people are very excited about it. So here's the thing. For me personally, it's not exciting to me because I don't really care much about portable play anymore. I never play my Switch portably personally. So the idea of any other device that's portable doesn't get me excited. I like the idea of a gaming-focused PC, piece of hardware that has a more affordable price, than $1,500 or $2,000. However, for me, as somebody who's not a big PC gamer, I do want to upgrade my whole PC setup. I just use a pretty decent laptop, and that's it. So for me, it's like if I was going to get something that's a gaming PC device, I don't really want to just spend $500 on a portable device that I don't want to play portably. I'd rather spend the $1,500 to $2,000 on an actual PC tower that's a real PC with a monitor and multiple monitors, and I can do all my video editing and any gaming or any streaming I may want to down the road. And so what the Steam Deck is, it just, while it's an awesome, sleek-looking device, and I love that there is competition for the Switch out there, it's good. We should want competition for the Switch out there. While I love it for those reasons, it's just not a device that appeals to me personally. Now, you also ask about a randomizer mode for Metroid Dread. Seems fine. I have no reason to, be upset about that idea, so sure, they should introduce it. I guess it'd be interesting to try. But similar to my opinions I shared recently on the current DLC for Dread, somewhat controversial opinions, you could say, if it's not introducing any new content, it doesn't personally interest me. So if all they do is take areas and bosses and elements of the current game and just move them around a little bit for a randomized mode, it's a neat idea, but it's not going to be something that gets me excited. I will only be excited about anything for Metroid Dread if it's new stuff to do and see. So I say bring it on, I guess, but really it's not anything appealing to me. Next question comes from Saruj Gazarian. I hope I pronounced your name right, and I apologize if I didn't. Who says, just a random thought. I just noticed that if Prime 4 does come out on the Switch would be the first console with both a Prime game and a non-Prime game, spin-offs and re-releases included for either series, where the former would have come out after the latter. We, Other M, came out after Prime 3, 3DS, Samus Returns came out after Federation Force. Thoughts? So, it's a long way to say that if Prime 4 does make it to Switch, and I think it will, I'm predicting Prime 4 is a cross-gen Switch and next-gen Nintendo console release. So I think there will be a Switch version of Prime 4, personally. That's my guess. Maybe I'm wrong down the road, but right now that's my guess. And so you're saying that the Switch would be the only console that has both a 2D and a Prime game, a main 2D and a main Prime game, right? Because what? I guess on the Game Boy, you'd have Zero Mission and Fusion, right? And then, of course, the original Game Boy. 3DS has Samus Returns and Federation Force. So, and you make a point about that. And then Wii has Other M and Prime 3, and that's, okay, so that's definitely not a 2D game. Now I'm, thinking in real time out loud with you guys as I try to remember what games came out on what console. And I think that you kind of blur the lines, I think, with the 3DS, and you point out the 3DS. Samus Returns is technically a 2D game, even though it's 3D graphics. Prime, Federation Force is a spin-off, but it's a Prime game first person. So anyway, I'm just kind of blabbing to you guys as I think out loud here. Sure. If we take this down to the bare essentials, a main Prime game number 4 and a main 2D game, Metroid 5, on the Switch, it would be the first time that we see that, and it's probably going to happen. And I think that more than anything, it would just be a testament to how popular the Switch is, and a testament to the fact that Nintendo finally chose a period of time to resurrect Metroid and Samus, and just make it valuable again, and put it to the forefront of their library and their catalog and their marketing. And that's a huge thing. The last time we saw Nintendo heavily market a Metroid game, honestly, was Other M. They didn't even overmarket Samus Returns. Other M was really a game where they pushed it pretty hardly, and I love the game, but as we know, most people don't, and so that kind of backfired on them in a way. Breaks my heart to say, but it really is just the truth. And so I think that the Switch era represents a turning point for a lot of things in the Nintendo world, and one of them, I think, is Metroid, and that makes me happier as can be, right? I think Metroid Dread is a great showcase, and I think Prime 4 is only going to continue that. If Prime 4 ends up skipping the Switch outright, that would be a different story. But I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole because as of right now, I don't think that that's going to happen. So overall, I think it's just a testament to the Switch's popularity and Nintendo's willingness to really focus on Metroid again. Next YouTube question comes from Dark Knight MC, who says, what do you think about Nintendo's tendency to repeat villains? Ridley, Ganondorf, Bowser, etc. Do you believe it is holding back their games and better to have newer villains? Or do you think the villains of the said games are inseparable and just as iconic as their main characters? Okay, so Is it better to have newer villains, or is it better to keep the same villains? You know, I don't know that I actually have a hard stance on this, and so maybe it was a weird question to choose, but I still liked the idea of the question. And, you know, I'm somebody who doesn't really mind that every Zelda game is probably going to have a version of Ganon, and that every Mario game is going to have Bowser, and every Metroid game is going to have Ridley. I think those are the main ones we think of, you know? I guess Kirby games have, like, Dedede and Meta Knight and stuff like that, and what are other ones? I don't know. Splatoon has the Octolings, and you could probably just go down the list. But I think the main three are the three that you mentioned, Ridley, Bowser, and Ganondorf. I don't mind that because there's something about that level of consistency that I think is really cool. And there's a level of familiarity, and there's also a way that each series has found a way to make it new and fresh within the context of each new game. While at the same time, I do agree that new is also valuable. And I think that really, Zelda and Metroid have done a better job of introducing new than Mario ever has. Mario relies on Bowser way more than the other two. Think of, you know, Girahim and Zant and characters like that that have shown up, or Skull Kid and whatnot. Those are characters in the Zelda universe that have really kind of taken over for Ganon in the occasional game. And the Metroid series has constantly done that because Ridley has never really been the main final foe in any of those games. Yes, he shows up as a big foe in most games. I guess Samus Returns, they added Ridley as the main final boss in that game, so that's the one exception. But outside of that, the main final bosses in pretty much every Metroid game are not Ridley. And so, yes, Ridley is a constant, but Ridley's not the main foe. He just kind of represents a part of Samus's past that comes back to haunt her constantly. And so I think Ridley fits in very well. And yes, it gets silly that Ridley constantly gets killed, but then also keeps coming back. And so maybe for the sake of that, the story continuity, it's goofy. But again, I just don't mind because I love Ridley and I love Metroid. So it's a great point. I think that it's just part of Nintendo's formula with some of their bigger games. I think that they overall handle it well. New is good, but I also like the familiar of these bosses. So that's just my personal preference. Next question comes from Patrick Toe, who said, "You've said many times before that you're a metal guy and your favorite band is Metallica. Cool. But who is the heaviest, most extreme metal band you're into, or the weirdest band you can still vibe with?" This is a great question. Obviously, I love a music question. I'm a musician myself, a metal drummer, professional, working for 20 years. And you're correct. Metallica is my all-time favorite band. And that will always be the truth. But who is the heaviest or most extreme metal band you're into? Well, there's a lot. So I've never really been into the most deathy of death tech metal bands that are out there, right? There was, the closest I've ever come is like short stints where I was really into a band like The Faceless or All Shall Perish, stuff like that. Thy Art is Murder. But I really, really don't like that kind of stuff too much. I can't listen to too much of it for a long period of time. In fact, I've kind of stopped listening to that kind of stuff. As far as more extreme, heavier bands I do currently actively listen to, Within the Ruins is a big one. Meshuggah, of course, is a really big one. Who else? Gosh, Born of Osiris. Those are the more extreme, heavier bands. And I know that there's the more deathy stuff that's more extreme than that. But like I said, I just don't really care for that stuff anymore. And being a drummer, I like a specific kind of technical drumming. I don't just like blast beat technical drumming. It's not very interesting to me. Even though it's impressive to move so fast, I just don't really care about it. So the real kind of stuff that I focus on outside of Metallica is probably Between the Buried and Me is my favorite band ever that isn't Metallica. Love those guys. Their last album was just incredible. I really love Periphery. I like other classic metal bands like Megadeth and Slayer and Pantera and stuff like that as well. But I really think that some of my top bands, Metallica, Between the Buried and Me, and Periphery are really kind of my top few. And Within the Ruins, I listen to them a lot. Listen to Fear Factory, listen to August Burns Red. And at this point, I'm going to have to cut myself off because I'll just kind of keep going on down that road. But yeah, those are really my favorite kinds of metal bands and my favorite kinds of metal genres. Next question comes from Bradley Sprinkle, who says, "How did you choose your YouTube name Rule of Two Review? I'm genuinely curious about the story behind that. Also, what is your favorite first-person shooter game besides Metroid Prime? You say yours is Apex Legends." So I have years and years and years ago talked about how I came up with Rule of Two Review, the name and the channel and all of that stuff. But it's been a while, so I think most people don't know that story. I'll give you the very, very quick version. And around 2010, when I discovered podcasts through IGN's podcasts, I thought it was a cool idea, and I had a great group of friends back in Denver, and I was like, let's do this ourselves. So I created a WordPress blog site that I wanted to make like my own version of IGN, writing reviews for movies and games. And I started 2 podcasts, one about gaming, one about movies. And the name I came up with for the site was Rule of Two Review. Now, Rule of Two Review comes from the idea of the Rule of Two, which is a Star Wars concept. The Rule of Two is what says that there can only be 2 Sith at any given time. Darth Bane came up with that in the previous canon a long, long time ago. And I was like, well, I'm a Star Wars fan. Rule of Two is like a cool thing that I really liked. And Rule of Two Review kind of has like a rhyming nomenclature, and the idea of reviewing games and movies was the initial purpose of that website. So that's why I just created sort of a clever sounding name, Rule of Two Review. Then I got too busy to do that and less excited about doing it. I decided to do a YouTube channel, and I was like, I'm just going to take the name for that old site that I did, and I'm going to make it the name of my YouTube channel. And so that's just what it came down to, and that's what the name still is. I will admit, and this is the tricky thing about doing YouTube, guys, if you ever decide to do it. If I was to make a YouTube channel now, I would not choose the name Rule of Two Review, and I've kind of thought about changing the name over the years here and there, but it's a tricky thing to do, and so I'm kind of just like not going to overthink it. I'm going to stick with the name. But I will say, if you ever decide to do something, you got to really think ahead on what you want your name to be, because nowadays Rule of Two Review doesn't necessarily make sense for what the channel is, but it's just what the name has always been, and so I'm sticking with it, and it is what it is. So my favorite first-person shooter that isn't Metroid Prime, honestly, it's going to sound kind of cliche, but it's probably Halo. I love Halo, man. I think Halo Infinite was a great campaign. The multiplayer sucks, but the campaign was amazing. And I love all the main games. So, you know, I like Doom. I do like Call of Duty multiplayer games, and I like plenty of other first-person games. But really, Halo is probably my favorite non-Metroid Prime first-person game. Next question comes from Dason31, or Dason31, who says, what do you think will be the direction for Zelda games after Breath of the Wild 2? Will it be Breath of the Wild 3, or will they do a new setting unrelated to every other Zelda game? Really good question, and I have a pretty straightforward answer. I don't think that they'll do Breath of the Wild 3. I would be shocked if they did. I would be excited if they did too, if I'm being honest. But I really don't think that they're going to do that. I think all they need to do is a direct sequel. Whatever Breath of the Wild 2 is going to turn into will be really exciting. I'm sure it's going to be amazing and we'll all love it. After that, I think Nintendo, you know, they don't like to sit in one thing for very long. Usually. There are exceptions, but in general, whether it's hardware or game ideas or franchises, they like to change things up. And I would like to believe that after they make this direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, that they're going to want to do something different next time. And in fact, I would love it if they even resurrected older ideas. I would love a companion, and I would love some more traditional dungeons. Maybe we even get that in Breath of the Wild 2. We don't actually know that answer yet. But I think that they're going to try to shake it up and introduce some new things, while maybe also recalling some older ideas that they used to do in the past. How it'll fit into, like, the timeline, as loose as that timeline is, I don't know. It's a really hard thing to predict, especially before we know anything about Breath of the Wild 2, right? So we're getting way ahead of ourselves. But it's an interesting question, and I think the main thing I wanted to just kind of throw out there as far as my answer is I don't think we'll get a Breath of the Wild 3. Next question comes from Bader Bianuni, and again, I am so sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. I'm not quite sure. Bianuni? Anyway, so thanks to your question. You say, do you think Metroid Prime will always be a first-person view? Do you think Nintendo might update Metroid Prime 4 to have options, first and third-person view? Take care. Interesting question, and I think that there's some interesting paths you can go down in exploring that idea. What I don't think will happen is Metroid Prime 4 specifically giving us an option. I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be first person. It just is going to be. Now, is there a way for a Metroid Prime game or any Metroid game to play more with the first and third person nature within one specific game? And to that, my answer is yes. We already have one example, and again, I know it's not a popular game, but Metroid Other M was a mainline huge game that did have first and third person elements, right? And while I don't think it was necessarily the most successful, I think the idea was sound, even if they would need to improve it. So I could see either a future Metroid game that does both first and third person, or I could even see another Metroid Prime game in the future that is a first person game, but that has third person sections or elements to it. I actually think Metroid Prime 4 may even have that. Now again, you say the option, which makes me think of something like a Skyrim, like an Elder Scrolls or a Fallout, where you can play first person or third person, just a click of a button and you can do either or. I don't ever think that Nintendo will do that for a Prime game. But I think that similar to the way in Metroid Prime, you're first person until you go into Morph Ball and then the camera becomes third person, there might be a way where they create sections that allows you to do something like that. And so that's something I would like to see in a Prime game. Maybe Prime 4 does that. Maybe it's something they do down the road. So that's kind of where I go with that idea. And today's last question comes from D.Me, who says, "Hey Rob, do you think that Prime 4 sales can be affected in a negative way because of the late release in 2023 or 24, which is a guess to be fair, just like Samus Returns released late in life on the 3DS? Or, in this case, Nintendo would do right and have a cross-gen release on Switch 2. Sorry for my English. No worries about the English. Probably not your first language. That is completely okay. Thanks for your question." It's a great question. Depending on when and how Prime 4 releases, could the sales be affected in a negative way, which is exactly what did happen with Metroid Samus Returns. I agree with you. I think if it released earlier on the 3DS, it probably would have sold even better than it did. However, and you bring this up as well, I don't think that's going to happen. I think Prime 4 is definitely going to be a huge seller. Whether it's cross-gen, which is my actual prediction, or if it gets just a Switch release, or even if it gets just a next-gen release, I think the Metroid name is too strong. Metroid Dread was too popular. Nintendo's brand in the Switch era is so well done, and their marketing is so good that they won't let Prime 4 be a sales failure, okay? And so, and you say a late release, 23 or 24, and that is also when I think it's going to release, but we don't know it, so to be fair, we're kind of guessing there. I just think that they're not going to miss the 120 million some odd install base of the Switch for Prime 4. That is going to be a huge feather in that game's cap as far as the opportunity to sell extremely well. And then if you do add on top of it, my prediction, and it sounds like yours, that they also make a next-gen version of Prime 4, that'll entice other people to be so excited to pick it up as a showcase for the new Nintendo hardware, that whether it's the Switch version with that huge install base, or the next-gen version as an exciting launch title or whatever happens there, and the fact that Metroid Dread has made Metroid and Samus popular again, I just don't see a world where Prime 4 isn't a huge success. Except for, and I mentioned this on a recent video, the one thing that I do think will hurt Metroid Prime 4 sales is if it's just not a good game. We can't forget that sometimes quality is an impact. I mean, in fact, most times it is. Yes, a popular name like a Halo or a Grand Theft Auto or a Zelda is going to just make a game sell well, but also a game has to be good. And so if a Metroid game, which is a strong name, especially now with Metroid Dread, if Prime 4 comes out and all the reviews and all the previews and all the fans say, wow, this game actually is just bad, less people will probably buy it. So I don't expect that to happen. I have complete faith it's going to be a great game, and you guys know that. And so, long story, not short at all, I think Prime 4 is going to be a big hit. I don't care when it's releasing in the Switch's life. People are going to buy the game like crazy. I think it's going to be great. And we're all going to celebrate an awesome Metroid Prime 4 game. And so that's today's Q&A. Thanks again to everyone who asked questions. Again, I apologize if I did not get to your question, but this was a lot of fun. Let me know your thoughts on all of my answers in the questions below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video. Bye-bye.